It's time.
Welcome. Episode 5. Now we're rolling right along here on the Front Office Podcast. I am your host, Pistols. As usual, I will be here with you for the remainder of the evening. We're rolling here, guys. We made affiliate and we're just cruising right along here on the stream. I'm having a lot of fun with this. I truly am. This has definitely been something that's been on my bucket list of things to do, is to start streaming. So here we are. Tonight, everybody's favorite time of the season. In the off season, we talk free agency. Free agency means everything. I love free agency. I love watching guys on the move, and the NFL is looked at as a business. And basically, your free agency is your business transactions for the year. Okay, you new teams sign new players and let go of old players, and once the contracts are up and whatnot, here we are. Here we are talking free agency. Free agency does two things, okay? It changes the context, and what I mean by that is it changes the look of an offense. Whether it be on, for fantasy football, we really only talk skill position players, wide receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends, and stuff like that. But in the reality of it too is guys on the offensive line are key parts of an offense. Linebacking core is a key part of the defense, and defensive linemen and things of that nature. The other thing that it does is it changes the price. Okay, when new guys sign to different teams, it creates a new value system and a new value tier of the existing players already on the team. And those are the things that you have to look out for. Most fantasy players, they only see the headline. They only see what they want to see. What would I pay for AJ Brown? Good Lord. Big body, go up and get it type of receiver who can run routes very efficiently. I'd give him the house, to be honest. Bring in a guy like that, your team instantly gets better. Now, is he going to cost too much? That's hard to say, because it's one of those things. You don't know what teams are willing to pay for somebody, and that's exactly what I just mentioned. It changes the price and the value of players. A guy like AJ Brown instantly becomes a starter. Instantly makes your team better, and he probably takes most of the target share. But like I was saying, most fantasy managers will only see the headline. They only see a guy go to a new team or stay with their existing team, and not really realize what else is happening around, as far as coaching schemes and is there a new head coach? Is there a new offense? Does this guy fit the bill? Is he going to have a superstar like season? And determining the value and where you want to draft him is key. So they're really just looking at the headlines. They don't really see the opportunity there. So that's one of the things that I look at. And, if you got a guy that, prime example, if you get a big name that goes into Cincinnati, for instance, it's Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, a guy that is, a guy that comes into the Bengals offense is probably going to have a lesser role because they already have two really good wide receivers, and target share is just going to be that room's going to be overcrowded. So it might not be wise for you to draft players from that team, but guys like Jamar Chase, who are studs in the league, man, I'll take anybody that makes the Bills defense better, because the Bills defense has just been dog water the past few years, and it's really sad to see my team struggle like that on defense. But yeah, I like to look at it as a cycle. Okay. The off-season reaction cycle is what I call it. It creates this, the first part in the cycle is the signing, right? Where do guys go? Kirk, I appreciate the follow. the story is the headline, okay, and that's the hype that builds around that player, where he went, where he ended up, and whatnot. Um, the ADP movement comes later on, as the offseason progresses and guys get into training camp, and where these guys solidify their their role on their existing team or new team, or however you want to look at it. And then the correction. Okay. Most drafters will react at step 2, and that's the story, that's the headline, that's basically where, oh my god, I just got to update that this player signed here. That's great, that's good, blah blah blah. But if you really want to win, act between step 2 and 4. Between steps 2 and 4, where that you get the story out of the way, the ADP movement, when the final rankings come out and all that, where people are being drafted, and then that correction. Like I said, the signing is the transaction, the story is the perception, the ADP moves before the role is clear. Basically, as I was just saying, as that ADP comes out, and that's really after a guy is on a team, he gets acclimated with his new offense and where he is on the depth chart, and how much snap share and the snap count that he's going to get, what percentage of the game does he play, and then the correction happens when the usage stabilizes. Again, solidify that number 1 wide receiver role, that number 2 wide receiver role, running back role. Where is it overcrowded? Is it not overcrowded? What's the quarterback situation, and whatnot? As I preach on the channel and on the podcast here, is it's not how many yards a player gets. Obviously, we know the yards are points when it comes to fantasy football, but just because a guy had 2,000 yards one season doesn't mean he's going to get 2,000 yards every single season, and that was just a product of a run heavy offense. And I'm sure I'm talking about Saquon Barkley when he had 2,000 yards rushing, and then this year barely cracked 1,000. But it's about what role they're likely to have in their new offense or their existing offense, and all those things that we look for in the offseason when free agency hits. I love free agency. It is my favorite time of the year, and I'm sure it's a lot of people's favorite times of the year to see who's on the move and who's going where, and what teams get better or what teams get worse. First market is always the big market. Quarterbacks. What quarterbacks are moving? What teams need quarterbacks? Now the NFL has really transitioned into it's a passing league. We see these cycles in the NFL. It's just a big old circle that kind of goes around and around as the years progress, and we see quarterback heavy seasons where the passing is up and the wide receivers have a massive role. And then we go back and then we kind of fall into this running back system, like we saw in the early 2000s with guys like Jerome Bettis and Jamal Lewis and guys like that, who were real bell cows in the NFL. So the NFL is just constantly cycling through and constantly changing. Right now we're in a quarterback heavy NFL. People, as the consumer, want to see high scoring games. We want to see offenses really take control of a game. Now, don't get me wrong, I love watching a good defense play. Defense wins championships, as we saw with the Seahawks this year. We've seen it in the past with really good Ravens defenses that won Super Bowls. I think in 2005 when they won with Trent Dilfer as their quarterback, there was a defense led team, and they ultimately won championship that year. Denver Broncos, when Peyton Manning was kind of on his way out, we saw a really, really solid defense hold the Panthers to almost nothing. So it's really hard to gauge the quarterback market because there's so many good quarterbacks out there. There's only a couple teams off the top of my head that really need a quarterback. The Jets and the Raiders are the two that come to mind, and possibly the Steelers if Aaron Rodgers decides he wants to retire finally. But who knows there? So we're not really seeing teams really kind of need that quarterback stability. Now, another team that comes to mind is the Colts. Who first guy I want to talk about is Daniel Jones. Is the best QB free agent currently. Now we saw what he did with the Colts. Kind of turned that franchise around a little bit. Kind of put the team on his back. Obviously, they had a really good run game with Jonathan Taylor, and we saw some no-name receivers like Alec Pierce and Josh Downs kind of really come on. Now Alec Pierce is also a free agent. We'll talk about him when we get to the wide receivers. But for the quarterbacks, Colts have a decision to make. Do they want to re-sign Daniel Jones or do they want to go elsewhere? I know they just came out and said Anthony Richardson is looking for a trade, or they gave him permission to seek a trade. So if that's the case, then maybe they're gearing up to re-sign Daniel Jones. But as far as I'm concerned, he's the best QB prospect out there. He's not a prospect, but best free agent quarterback out there right now. Another guy who really kind of solidified a role for me is Malik Willis. Jordan Love got hurt, and he came in and he won games for the Packers, and really proved that he could be a starter in the league. Now the Raiders are a tough one because they have the first pick in the draft, and they're more than likely going with Fernando Mendoza, as they should. Guy just is a baller. Won a national championship over there in Indiana, and he's a guy that's coming in and is probably going to make the Raiders better. Like I said, we're looking at the Aaron Rodgers situation. I know the Minnesota Vikings are in shambles right now because they can't figure out their quarterback situation. But when you invest in a guy like JJ McCarthy, they're kind of locked in there for a little bit. I could see maybe Kirk Cousins going back there because he's now a free agent since Falcons released him. And maybe mentoring JJ for a little bit while Kirk kind of finishes out his career. That would be the best case scenario for the Vikings, in my opinion. But who knows? But those are really kind of the two guys. Everybody else on this list is really kind of backup material. Like I said, Aaron Rodgers is a free agent, but that's dependent on if he wants to retire or not. Russell Wilson, we saw kind of fall off the face of the earth. He's solidified a backup role somewhere. Marcus Mariota came in and played very well for the Commanders as, when Jane Daniels got hurt. But Mariota's a viable backup for sure. Now, here's the thing with Malik Willis. If he goes to the Cardinals, I mean, it's a great fit. Cardinals are kind of in shambles too. They just got a new head coach, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray, in my opinion, is kind of ass. So he's not really a guy that I'm too worried about. He's kind of just that guy that's there because they drafted him and they paid him a ton of money, and they don't really know what to do with him. But he doesn't have a big arm. All he can do is run. He's like 5'8", and it's just Arizona with Malik Willis. He really showed that he could he could run, he could throw. With Marvin Harrison Jr., I need to see some work ethic out of him. I really do. I think he could be great in this league. I had Marvin Harrison Jr. on my fantasy teams this year. And I got to tell you, it was one of the most frustrating things ever. This guy who's got all this talent, just out there doing his thing and just not catching balls. He seems lazy to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong. But he's just a guy that's not on my radar at all. Maybe Malik Willis comes in there and turns the tide for the Cardinals. One can only hope, to be honest. I prefer PPR. PPR is much better, my opinion. You get that full point per reception. It kind of balances the value of wide receivers and running backs, because in a half PPR you're valuing running backs more. In a PPR you kind of value both equally, because if you get that workhorse running back that is going to get 30 touches a game, like, you're going to be fine. Then if you find a guy that maybe only rushes the ball 15 times, but he gets 5 to 10 targets out of the backfield, that's an even balance for me. And then, of course, like I said, it's a quarterback passing league, so full PPR. And when you got guys dropping back, throwing the ball 40, 50 times a game, the points are going to be there. Just in my opinion, PPR is just better. But again, with the quarterback market being so saturated and there's being such good quarterbacks in the league right now, you got to ask yourself, are they going to be the clear starter? Does the scheme support his strengths? What are his weaknesses? Is the rushing floor secure? Is the passing volume going to change with a guy like that? A guy like Malik Willis, who really kind of came out and, like I said, played very well when Jordan Love got hurt, kind of solidified himself as a starter in the league. He's got to make a very careful decision on where he wants to go if he wants to be a starter in the league. And all those things factor into, the quarterback market. Like I said, quarterbacks are really, because there's so many, it's just one of those things that, like, quarterback free agent market is not really something that you kind of need to pay too much attention to, unless some of these guys start really getting hurt and, the market kind of shifts back to a run heavy offense. Which brings me to the next point that I want to make is the running back market. Running backs are about volume and security. Okay. Now we see a lot of teams kind of do this running back by committee approach. And that is probably one of the most frustrating things a fantasy manager can come across, is if you got a team that just cycles through running backs every other play or every other series, or however you want to put it. We saw that a lot in Seattle with Zach Charbonnet and Ken Walker. We saw that a lot with the Steelers with Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell. Now Gainwell is a free agent, so if he doesn't come back, I posted a video on my YouTube. Catch that over at Pistols Live HQ on YouTube. And Jaylen Warren is one of my early risers because he showed that he's capable of being a workhorse running back in the league, but also having Kenneth Gainwell there kind of took away from his passing game a little bit. But if Kenneth Gainwell doesn't re-sign there, then that's Jaylen Warren's backfield all day long. And Mike McCarthy coming in there is a guy that historically has featured his number one running back in his offense. So I see Jaylen Warren being one of those guys that can just really take off. And that's the major question. Is it a true vacancy in the running back market, or is it going to be a committee? If a guy goes in to a team that already has a number one running back, it's most likely going to be a committee. Just you hate to see it, but that's just the reality of the NFL and how it happens. If you get a really good running back in there behind your already really good running back, you're going to want to get both of them the ball. So it's going to be a 50-50 split. What are the coaching tendencies? Do they feature a running back? Are they more pass heavy? Are they defensive minded? All these things go into figuring out the value of running backs and where they are currently. The contract structure. What does that mean for a running back? The best running back right now out there, probably Travis Etienne, in my opinion. I'd argue Kenneth Walker, who really showed some leadership and really solidified himself as a workhorse running back, especially in the Super Bowl game. But I can't see him leaving Seattle, especially with Charbonnet getting hurt so late in the season. He's probably going to miss the first month or two of the season, so they're going to need to do something there. But that leaves me with Travis Etienne out of Jacksonville. Really kind of solidified himself as the number one running back there. He has great hands out of the backfield. We saw his receptions increase. We saw the Jaguars really kind of take on a run-heavy offense, even with Trevor Lawrence, especially after they lost Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. kind of had a down season. They really leaned on ETN. In my opinion, he's probably the best out there. Brees Hall is another free agent that is really good. Now it's unfortunate when you talk about Jets players because of the system that they come in and they come from. The Jets are just bad. They've been bad for years now. As a Bills fan, and I love to see the division just in shambles. That just makes it easier for us to walk away with win after win. Um, Now I know we split one with the Patriots this year, but either way, those three guys are probably the top of my list. Um, again, is it a secure role, or is it just assumed that he's going to be the starting running back? Now, all these guys are going to be on the move, and of course, they're looking to better themselves and they want more money. And um, I think this week is the franchise tag deadline. So we're going to see some guys get franchise tagged. We already saw George Pickens get franchise tagged by Dallas. We saw Kyle Pitts get franchise tagged by Atlanta, um, which leads into the wide receiver market. You know, again, the wide receiver. There's so many wide receivers in the league. Okay, every team has at least three wide receivers on the field. Well, at least two, with a lot of teams that go that three wide receiver package, with the tight end on the outside or in the inside, or however you want to look at that. Um, but the wide receivers are narrative driven, right? Who's their quarterback? What's the situation? All these things can make an ADP. It inflates the ADP very, very, very rapidly. Um, and there's no doubt that these guys are talented, right? You made it to the NFL. It's a very hard league to get into. Um, these kids coming out of college are, 21, 22 years old. Um, Unless you're Brandon Whedon, who comes in at 28. But for the most part, um, the wide receiver market is really the one that I always watch, because those are where a lot of your points come from, right? Your quarterback is number one. They get the most points because of the way the structure is in the league. And then again, like I said last episode, when it comes down to knowing your scoring settings, if it is a full PPR or if it's a half PPR, where do you kind of lean on your wide receivers? Does the target tree consolidate wide receivers, or does it dilute it? Does it become overcrowded? Um, what's the quarterback situation like? Is it a guy that really goes out there and throws the ball 40, 50 times a week, or is it a guy that goes out there and throws it 15 to 20 times a week? And then the red zone usage is really a key here too, because in the red zone, that's where the points come from. Obviously, that's where you score touchdowns, and depending on your settings there, every touchdown is, standard. I think is 6 points, or actually, I think standard might be 4 points for a touchdown. You change your settings, you get full 6 points every time they score a touchdown, and then another point for the catch. And depending on how many yards you get, fraction of points there too. So those things are really the things that you need to look at when a wide receiver, changes teams and seeks free agency to just kind of see what's out there. The best one available, in my opinion, Mike Evans, guy that's coming off 11,000-yard seasons, holds the record for most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons since he came into the league. Big body guy, huge target. Anybody would be lucky to have him. Again, where he ends up going, obviously now free agency doesn't start till next week. I think on the 9th or the 10th or something like that. But a guy like Mike Evans, he makes your team better. He's a middle of the field catch guy, with a massive vertical, with a big radius that get the ball in the area, and he's probably going to catch the ball. He's very hard to bring down. He's very hard to box out. Cornerbacks are tiny, and Mike Evans is not a tiny guy. He's one of the better receivers out there. He ranks, to me, one of the top free agent wide receivers out there. Another guy is Tyreek Hill. A lot of people think that he might be the best one out there, but he's coming off a very, very gruesome injury, which could be career ending for him. Dislocated his knee, ankle, tore both ligaments in his knee, and it's a very, very tough injury to fully recover from. Now, Tyreek Hill has been known for his speed, so an injury like this will really probably slow him down. He's definitely not going to be the same player he used to be. But these guys have the best doctors working on them in the world. So you see these guys come back from injuries, better than ever. We saw guys like, Adrian Peterson was just an absolute freak athlete. When he tore his ACL, he came back and rushed for like 2,000 yards the next season. So it can happen. But to me, I think he's just getting up there in age. I'm pretty sure he turned 32 today. So he's going into the, that age. Is he too old? Is he still going to be good with the injury that happened? And so it's really a gamble. Plus, he's probably going to cost a lot. I know the salary cap went up 22 million from last season, which is a big jump. Of course, the salary cap is contingent on sponsorships and TV revenue and all that stuff, and as that grows, that's where the salary cap comes from. For those of you that didn't know that. A guy like Deebo Samuel is also a free agent, still has good years left in him. Now, of course, these guys are older. We see Keenan Allen on this list too. To bring in an older wide receiver like that, a guy who's got to run down the field on every play. Just that age curve really starts to show in the young 30s there. Couple young guys that are on there. We look at a guy like Romeo Doubs. He's been really solid in Green Bay. Probably makes your receiving core better just having him on the roster. Guy's very good at running routes, very good at getting open deep and creating separation. So the wide receiver market is just one of those things that you really got to look at the saturation there. Who's already on the team? Where is he going to fall on the depth chart? How much is he actually going to be out there on the field week in and week out? You want guys that are out there that are going to take up a lot of those snaps, especially when you have a quarterback that's going to drop back, 30, 40 times, as opposed to, 15, 20, 25 times. So all these things go into the wide receiver market. It's just one of those things that could become oversaturated. Like I said, if the Bengals decide that they want to sign a wide receiver, they already have two really good receivers, so you're looking at an oversaturation there. If you're looking at a team like the Bills who don't have a clear number one, team like the Titans who don't have a clear number one, the list goes on and on about teams that don't have clear number ones in their wide receiver core. So they look to the free agent market to kind of bolster those wide receiving, the wide receiving element of an offense. Now, of course, you have to look at the tight ends as well. I hate looking at the tight ends because I think it's becoming an irrelevant position, especially in fantasy football. Like I mentioned before, we saw Trey McBride lead all tight ends, and he had like 400 more yards than the next guy. So only tight end to cross 1,000 yards might be the only one worth it in an offense that heavily involves the tight end. When it comes to tight ends, it's is it the things that you have to ask yourself with the tight end is, the biggest one is, does this offense feature a tight end? Is the volume there, or are they touchdown dependent? A lot of teams have tight ends on their roster that they stay in and block, and they don't really gain the yards. But down in the red zone, that's their main target. Is that role clarity? Has that improved at all? free agency doesn't create the fantasy points. It's the usage, it's the role, it's the stability. The name is great. Don't get me wrong. The name is there. You can draft a guy based on name, but a lot of the times you're going to be disappointed if you go on name alone. We really want to take into consideration um, the situation there. A team like the Steelers, who had 3 tight ends on the field at almost every play, um, probably not a good idea to draft any of those guys. You're just going to be guessing on which one's going to get the ball that day. Like I said, Trey McBride's the only really guy that um, showed a clear number one option. I'm pretty sure he led all receivers, including the wide receivers. He on the Cardinals, but I mean the Cardinals were just bad. So one of the tight ends becoming irrelevant. It's such a tough market, and I do hate talking about it, but we have to because it's fantasy football, and they are a part of a fantasy football roster. Travis Kelce is your biggest name. Of course, he's in that age curve and contemplating retirement, especially with the Mahomes injury. We don't know if he's going to be back for the start of the season, which he probably won't be. David Njoku is another name who's been a really solid tight end for the Browns. I know it's the Browns. Browns are bad. Historically, they've been bad, but they really featured the tight end position quite a bit over the years, and he's going to be testing the free agency. He's a big, fast tight end who's hard to bring down and can make contested catches in the middle of the field, and that's really what you look for from the tight end position. A guy like Taysom Hill, who's a free agent this year, who might not be a Saint, which is crazy to think about because he's a guy that really does it all for them. He came in as a quarterback. They switched him to tight end. He's played running back in that offense, so he's really the only guy that's been kind of a jack of all trades. He's a guy that could make any team better. The problem that fantasy football has is when you start getting into these committees and you start bringing in guys for certain packages, if you don't have a clear number one and you constantly split, especially if you have roles identified, if you have a guy that is just going to run the ball, he's an every down back, you have that kind of element of surprise on offense. Say, the play action works a little bit better. If you know that if you bring in a guy that is primarily a pass catching back out of the backfield on third downs, and you kind of know what's coming as a defense, you're able to read that and react to it much faster, and your tendency to stop the play is a lot higher because you know what's coming. If you have that guy that's solidified his role as every down back, the play action works a lot more because you don't know if they're going to pass, you don't know if they're going to run. It just creates that kind of element of surprise for, that offense. But tight ends, they're just becoming irrelevant. And, those are the names on the list that really come to mind when talking about tight end free agents who could move, who might not move. But for the most part, with free agency, it's a fun time of the year. It really is, and it's fantastic. A lot of teams, create a new identity, and they bring guys in and they let guys go, and it's constantly changing year after year. But for the most part, there's 3 guidelines that I go by for draft day, and when you make your draft day adjustments, you wait for the role clarity. Of course, what I mean by that is when a new guy joins the team, you wait to see where they're gonna be and what that structure is gonna look like. Exploit the overreactions. If you do that, you kind of get an idea on where these guys are gonna fall, and let people kind of draft, get them off the board so you don't have to make a decision on them. I always look at things that way, and when I'm drafting and I look at, okay, where's this guy going? Like off the top of my head, Kyle Pitts has been that guy for the last 4 years. Uh, sorry, he's been a guy that has had decent seasons, of course, if you look at the stats. But he's a guy that doesn't put up fantasy points. And outside of a couple games last season, he really did the same thing again. But he's a guy that gets taken high every year, and just get him off the board so you don't have to make a decision on him. And then the last thing is separate the narrative from the structure. Is it just a headline, or is this guy actually going to do something in this offense? I remember one year that Chad Ochocinco went from the Bengals to the Patriots. And I had the biggest overreaction to Chad Ochocinco going to the Patriots. I think it was like 2010, maybe. It was early 2000s or late 2000s, early 2010s, whatever the case may be. But I thought that with Tom Brady, that he was just going to be a number one receiver. He's going to be the guy. That was not the case. I had wasted a draft pick on him. He was my wide receiver one, the first wide receiver that I picked off the board, and did not pan out well for me because they ended up featuring Wes Welker that year, and I think they still had Gronk and whoever else was there. Aaron Hernandez was there at the time, but yeah, for the most part, like, you got to separate that narrative and make sure it's not just a headline. Make sure it's not just a guy going to a new team, and really find that structure and follow that structure and that offensive scheme, and make sure that, these guys are actually going to produce in their new offenses. And that's really kind of what you look for. It's really, free agency is really the first step in, it's that first test of discipline, right? Looking at those headlines, and most leagues, they're going to remember the signing, right? But they won't remember the role, and they'll just kind of bypass it and look at the headline. And but yeah, that discipline comes in, and knowing what they're going to do in an offense, it's just going to be a lot easier for you to draft on draft day. Stay rational now. Stay rational in August when you're getting ready to draft. That mindset it beats the rankings every day of the week. We prepare now, we win later. That's the point of the off season, and the point of the podcast to keep you guys, to help you guys along on your draft day. Like I said, I am your host, Pistols. This was episode 5 of the Front Office Podcast. I appreciate y'all being here. Thank you so much for the support. You catch me every Sunday and Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, Front Office Podcast, guys. Thank you so much for being here. We'll catch you guys on the next one.